الآن. أكثر من 40 عاماً من العطاء في مجال التطوير المهني داخل أروقة الجامعة كأستاذ ومعلم، وخارجها من خلال ورش العمل والبرامج المختلفة لنشر الوعي عن تطبيقات علم التطوير المهني. وترأس بنجاح قيادة الهيئة القومية الأمريكية للتطوير المهني. الكلمة الرئيسية للمؤتمر. دعونا نرحب بالبروفيسور ريتش فيلر.
Thank you very much for your wonderful welcome. I've enjoyed my 10-day experience in your wonderful country, and I'm thrilled to be in Aswan in this wonderful community and saw your great university the other day. Thank you very much. We'll make some adjustments with our equipment, but I'm going to first ask you to do something for me. You've been sitting a while, so I'm going to ask you to follow my directions very specifically. Would you please stand up and put your hands as high? Everyone up, please. You've been sitting a long time. And I'd like you to look around if you would, please. Great. And now I'll ask you to sit down, please. There you go, good for you. Because I have learned something a long time ago. When I asked you to It's easy, yes, I don't know how to make that. Okay. If you remember my directions, they were to ask you to stand straight up and put your hands straight up. But what were people doing? They were doing this. Now, why were you doing that? Because I did it. Because we know in truth, it is more important what we do than what we say. It is more important what we do than what we say. So we come to this remarkable place to have the first conference like this with a team of people that made this work so well. They didn't talk about it, they did it. And I'm going to ask you to think about how you can go about being here and do what we ask you to do and not just talk about it. For example, if you notice, I'd like you to take a look at yourself. I'd like you to take a look at yourself just like I've asked them to take a look at themselves. There, oops, going ahead a little bit. Because we're really here to look at ourselves and look at our work. That's why we're here. And I'd like you to do that and not just talk about it. If you think about what we see here, and what we're hoping to have happen, my intentions are to really challenge you to think about what career development is. Because it's really our task here to create a new story. Okay, sure. I'll do one more piece. So we're trying to connect the notion of learning, work, and well-being.
زي ما احنا شايفين كل واحد بيحب دايما يشوف نفسه في احسن حال ويشوف عمله وانجازاته اكتر حاجه رائعه في الوجود. فطبعا محتاجين دايما ان احنا نبص لاحسن مميزات فينا.
And we're trying to ask you, how do you get to be your best? Not in an individual way, but how do you become your best? How do we become our best as a community, the best school you can be? How do we build a culture that we become our best? That's really what I'm asking you to do and not just talk about.
المفروض ان كل واحد يقدر بنفسه يكتشف يقدر يطور من نفسه ازاي علشان يوصل لاحسن حال او احسن صورة افضل صورة المفروض يوصل لها.
And could you leave this session with a new story about jobs? Because careers are not just about jobs, as your many speakers have told you. It's not just about I am much larger than my job, and so are you, and you, and you. So we holistically say you're much larger than that. And secondly, a story about who we are and how we want to live.
احنا مين؟ كل واحد لازم يدور هو مين، وقصة كل واحد لازم يطلع من هنا النهارده بقصة جديدة ليه هو. واحنا مش مجرد كلمة كارير هي شغلانة أو وظيفة، لا، كارير معناه حياة كاملة لكل إنسان فينا.
I see some people nodding. You are much larger than your job. It's about how do you want to live. So I'd like you to think about how could we learn this. So the best thing I could do was to go to ChatGPT. And I said to them, what do people in the Mideast want to know about career development? And look at my answers in the red. They're all the things you've heard about from previous speakers. That's what ChatGPT did for us. And you'll notice that's critical, important stuff that we all work on. And then I went to ChatGPT and I said, how will career development change in the Mideast in the next 20 years? And they began giving answers that were a little more holistic, a little more focused on being flexible. Okay?
اوكي. من ضمن التطلعات او من ضمن افكار بروفيسور ريتش فيلر انه كان بيفكر ازاي يتم تنميه منطقه الشرق الاوسط كامله، ومن ضمن المعروض حاليا على السلايد كانت افكاره وما زالت اللي بيحاول يطبقها.
So then I went and said, well, how is career coaching changing? And it talked a whole lot about being more personalized, flexible, because your students want a more personalized, flexible experience that's more holistic. And they're talking about how do we respect diversity and inclusion much more to give more people access and democratizing access and giving them voice to self-advocate for themselves. Then I said, well, if this ChatGPT is any good at all, what do they want to say about me? And I looked up there and said, that's not me. There's much more to that than me. And that's why we have to be careful about ChatGPT. So, but then I said, well, who am I and what is career development to me? And I said, well, if I was a baby, I'd ask you to help me be future ready. Because it's hard to predict the future, but what do it mean to be future ready? So I put this little film together for you. We don't pick our parents or our birthplaces. We don't all start equally. Career development is the great equalizer. It democratizes opportunities across the world and expands possibilities. It helps us navigate a lifetime of transition and to be a better human being so we can do our best at building a sustainable world. Career development gives us a voice. It unearths our hidden assets and brings feedback to our blind spots. It clarifies narratives about our experiences and promotes dignity and decent work for all. It nudges us to connect, to matter, to live fully. When I feel irrelevant or isolated or invisible, career development fuels me to move forward. It nurtures me to give and grow, to finish strong with gratitude, to learn to live out of love. As I reflect on becoming who I am and adapting to lifelong learning and designing a good life, I turn to career development, and I invite you to do the same. We don't pick our parents or... I apologize, I'm monolingual. I would love to talk in Arabic. But that's a story about who I am that ChatGPT could never tell you. So it's about putting our glasses on to look at ourselves, to know ourselves better, and to look at how we want to be in the world and how we want to live. Now, if you think about career development, the challenge we face is how do we connect a new story about learning, work, and well-being? That's the new story we have to write. And if you look at these three areas, we know that learning is really about how do you process information, and then how do you reflect on any experience you have? Because we know the power is not in the experience, it's the reflection on the experience. That's where we really learn. Secondly, if you think about work, as you heard so well from my colleague Letitia, the whole notion about the UN sustainability goals. We're trying to figure out what is work about, because we need to be involved in very purposeful commitments to make the world a better place. Whether we talk about climate change, or water, access, diversity, whatever, how do we find a way to be challenged by the things that we have to solve, which is really what work is about? And third, it's the notion of well-being. And well-being is really about how your life experience is going. How is it going for you? Are you happy? Do you feel complete? Do you feel connected? That's what well-being means. And the intersection of that is really the challenge of career development.
زي ما حضراتكم شايفين القصة الجديدة اللي المفروض نطلع بيها النهاردة واحنا خارجين من القاعة، ازاي انا مين هو ماي، وازاي اقدر اشوف الجزء اللي في النص اللي بيجمع ما بين 3 محاور رئيسية ما بين التعلم والوظيفة وكيفية الحياة، حياة كريمة. اول حاجة بالنسبة للتعلم احنا بنتكلم ازاي حضراتكم او ازاي الانسان يقدر ياخد معلومات ويفهمها ويعمل منها مخرجات. وبالنسبة للعمل ازاي الواحد يكون داخل دايما في اهداف كبيرة تفيد المجتمع ككل مش كفرد. وبالنسبة طبعا ازاي نقدر نعيش حياة سعيدة هو الويل بينج.
So if that is the challenge of why we're here, are you willing to put the glasses on? Will you look at yourself and what you do and not what you say? And will you look at the work we do? That's the challenge of this great conference. John Dewey said it very well. Take any experience you have and you only learn from it from reflecting on it. And the more reflection we do, the more we learn about ourselves and the more we understand the systems and the work that we are involved with.
اللي بنتعلم منه مش كلمة الخبرة، تمام؟ اللي بنتعلم منه دايما ان احنا ازاي نستفيد او نطلع بالدرس المستفاد من مواقف معينة او تجارب احنا مرينا بيها.
So then the question is, can career development help us to be our best? And how do we connect who we are to our what's next possibilities? Because I would say to you, career development is not a long-term thing, it's a career month to month to month to month because of the change we live with and how you make your own adaptation. So when we think about purposeful commitments, what do you deeply care about? What matters to you so much? And how does it challenge who you are and your identity so that you can adapt to be what you have to be for the next month or the next job or the next role that you play in your life? And what are the tasks that you not only are good at, but you like to do? Just liking it is not enough. What are you capable at? What are your aptitudes? What are you good at? What shows up all the time that gets you into flow? That's really critical. And then what people will pay you to do any of that? And not all of our opportunities get paid. We get rewarded in other ways. There's other ways to be rewarded. What is the reward structure that you need? That's the third part. Because we're really asking, how do we say, what are your next possibilities?
علشان نقدر نعرف كل واحد فينا يقدر يعرف مستقبله رايح على فين او ايه الامكانيات اللي موجوده عنده دلوقتي وهتأهله لايه بعدين كنظره مستقبليه. المفروض نبص دايما للثلاث محاور دول. اول حاجه ايه الالتزامات اللي انا بقوم بيها والمسؤوليات اللي انا بقوم بيها حاليا اللي على عاتقي وعلى كتفي. ورقم 2 ايه اللي انا بحب اعمله، ايه اللي انا اقدر اعمله، في فرق كبير ما بين الاثنين. والمحور الثالث ايه العائد اللي هيعود عليا بعد ما اكتسبت خبرات معينه بسبب الحاجات اللي انا بعملها او بحبها وبسبب الخبرات اللي انا اتعلمتها. طبعا زي ما حضراتكم شايفين اللي في النص هي البوسيبيليتيز او المستقبل.
Some people will say a smart person is one who can make complex things simple. And not knowing your context well and not knowing your language, I hope I'm making it simple. Because it's so much more to understand we are just not a job. It's about how do we learn, how do we work, and how do we build a sense of well-being so we build not only a new story about our jobs, but a new story about what it is we want. That's the challenge we're here for. Really change asks us to think differently about this notion of a new story. Because back to the gentleman looking in the mirror, you having new glasses on, if you do the same things over and over again, sit with the same people, don't get to travel, don't put yourself in new environments, don't get new feedback, how do you get to learn? And that's the idea of diversity, and it's so powerful to be included in situations that stretch you. So we could say, we need a new story about jobs. But we do know that these change factors greatly have impacted us. We all have words for it, but we know that we're going to live longer, the longevity premium, we're hearing much about that. The smart machine, ChatGPT, all the things that we know are making us more accessible to technology, that are going to use all kinds of technologies to make us smarter, but also scare us some. Third, this whole computational world that we live in is scaring many of us and giving others great opportunity. Or the new media that we're all wondering, is it good for our kids? How do we get our media done? Or how come this speaker is using video and film and not lecturing to you? Because he knows that lecturing in one ear and out the other. Images and stimulants, that's what really gets us to grab onto how we feel about something. Or supersized organizations. Look at the amount of organizations that are coming together to consolidate. Look at the large companies that run the world. How do we begin to understand superstructures? And last, look how globally connected we are, that I get to be privileged to be here today with you.
كل دي من ضمن المحاور اللي البروفيسور ريتش فيلر هيتكلم فيها بالنسبة للأهداف، بالنسبة للميديا وتأثيراتها والفيديوهات اللي بيتم إعلانها للأسف وليها تأثير سلبي على الأشخاص. هيتكلم عن المؤسسات وطريقة فكرهم وإزاي نقدر نعمل زرع للتطوير المهني جواه، وطبعا بالمقام الأول والأخير إزاي يبقى في تطوير مهني على الكوكب كله، على الكرة الأرضية كلها.
We could talk about trends like COVID and the great presentation you gave this morning, ma'am, about what's trending in this culture. We can find that information out, but I want you to look more into yourself because the data will be there wherever you choose to find it. But there's also this story about all jobs. And I'd like you to think about all the work you do as this. All jobs are problems to be solved. Some of you are entrepreneurs. Some of you are told to go to work and be a consultant. You're basically being told, go do a job to solve a problem, and someone reaches in their pocket and they take their discretionary money to pay you. Because every worker is really a consultant for as long as they have their job. And that's why we know we have to be thinking about, we are always having to learn to solve problems. Secondly, every job, whether you're young like Mustaka or you're a young boy in the back here, every job, and if you're delivering papers or whatever you're doing some kind of service, you're basically doing a paid internship. So look at every job as a paid internship because it's what you learn that really is the paycheck to get you ready for the next possibility you have. The president of the university here had many other jobs before he became president, and each one paid him to learn to be ready to be a great president. And while you're working, that's really where you learn. You learn occupational skills and competencies at work, and that's why work is so critical to teaching us all we need to know.
كيفية التعلم. كل الوظائف اللي الواحد بيشتغلها في حياته طبعا بتبني من خبراته أو بتبني من تجارب بتاعته على مر الطريق. بالنسبة لل بروفيسور ريتش فيلر بيأكد إن حتى لو عامل، فالعامل ده طول ما هو فعلا بيقبض مرتبه هو دايما هيبقى عنده الحل الوظيفة اللي بيشتغلها أو المشاكل اللي بتطرأ عن طريق الوظيفة اللي بيشتغلها.
And the last way to understand a new story about your job is to understand that it's access. It's access to the learning and development you will do on the job that really gets you to grow the most. So how do you develop? When you go to work, are you learning? Are you meeting people and growing your social capital and finding a way to grow?
الديفلوبمنت أو التنمية هي عبارة عن مقابلات، عبارة عن ناس حوالينا بنتعامل معاهم طول الوقت، وبالتالي التطوير أو التنمية هي حاجة دايما هتبقى مستمرة طول ما احنا بنقابل ناس، طول ما احنا بنتعامل، طول ما احنا عندنا interaction أو التفاعل مع الآخرين.
And what do we know about how adults learn? We talk about upskilling and new skills. What do we really know about what the research says about how we learn? You could almost guess. What percentage of your learning as an adult comes from challenging jobs and assignments or stretch assignments or new roles? Can you give me a number? Anybody want to guess? What does the research say? 70%. So most of our learning to upskill or to be a better adult learner or be involved in new learning that's going to help your company add value or service people better, you learn it on the job. So who you are with and your supervisor and how they treat you is critical to how much you can learn. And then we take the question about learning from others, both good and bad role models, because we also learn from bad role models how not to act. If you surround yourself with people and observe them, look at what you learn about how to be a character as well as an employee.
الوظائف التأثير بتاعها على الشخص انه يقدر يستمد منها خبرة او يتعلم تعلم فعلا كافي ووافي هي 70%. اما بالنسبة للأمثلة من التعامل مع الآخرين بتأثر فينا بنسبة 20% بس، سواء المثال جيد أو سيء.
And there's no doubt the power of going for more learning, post-secondary training, any school that you go to, because you need to learn language and models and context. But it's really a small way in terms of how you really learn. So we do definitely need more learning in traditional ways, but it's the experience and the reflection on it and the feedback that gives us the most learning.
آخر 100% أو عشان نكمل المعادلة على بعضها هي 10%، ودي تندرج تحت برامج التدريب أو القراءة أو التعلم الذاتي.
Now, just like ChatGPT said you'll want to know about where the jobs are, we can all find different research to come up with it. There's just so many reports. You'll choose what you want to, and this is a very recent, very good one talking about what skills are most important for the vast number of openings. That's a new way to look at what skills matter most, and these 4 are very critical. But you can find that, but you can't find that in yourself. Secondly, we know that if you get a good liberal arts education or go to college and you come out to look for a job, that the research will say these additional skills or certificates or content areas double the number of jobs you can search for, then double the number of jobs you can apply for. So that suggests regardless of what degree you get, these are critical to you finding more opportunities. And that's critical because no longer do we think one job, one degree, or one program can take you right to one job. Many of us in here got degrees in something that didn't crosswalk to a job. Is that right? But it's these other skills we learn that add to that baseline that's so critical.
كل واحد بيدور على وظيفة أو على عمل ما مناسب ليه، المفروض إنه يقدر بنفسه عشان يزود المجالات أو يزود النسب إن يبقى فيه نجاح إنه يقدر ياخد وظيفة أو أكتر، فلازم طبعًا يقدر يempower himself أو يعزز قدراته بأكتر حاجة خبرة أو تعلم علشان نقدر نزود فرص في الوظائف بتاعته.
Another way to understand, even another study, is to take a look at what seem to be the most good skill to have, and they're clumped easily into these areas. Human skills, digital building skills, and business enablers. 3 very good words to understand. That's what the marketplace is demanding from you. And how you get them is less important than you just get them somehow. And that's why upskilling is so critical in addition to training, vocational schools, and post-secondary education. And if you really want to explore, go to the World Economic Forum. This is the most amazing machine learning system I've ever seen to understand the complexities of the issues in the world. And they map out how all of the different segments connect. There's so much information there, but it's not in you. You can go get that. Okay. It's okay. It's okay. Just 3, 4 different ways to get information about where the jobs are. That's all. And then there's this problem. My colleague here does a remarkable job in a podcast setup that he had, Brian Hutchinson. And he did a remarkable interview with Jim Bright, who thinks outside the box. He wore that glasses in a whole different way. He asked new questions. And he said, while all that is helpful, we live in chaos. And how do we begin to understand with such turbulence and such chaos, how do we understand that we want to move to live on the edge a little bit more? So I could ask each of you with your sunglasses on, how will you accept change? How will you learn from your mistakes? That's the power of learning from mistakes. How welcoming are you to uncertainty, which is everywhere today? And how do you take planned risks? That's threatening to many of us who want stability. And yet we live in a world of great change. So we came here today to say, are you looking for a new story to write about jobs and how you want to live? A new story about who we are. Who are we right now in terms of being a global citizen? Who are we in terms of how we want to live our life? I hope this little video clip will move you. One way to be moved is to think about, before the video clip, is to think about the power of the relationship between mental health and the workplace. Loneliness is said to be the #1 disease in the US right now, loneliness. So our Surgeon General came out with a report recently to say we have to pay attention to mental illness and mental health, actually, mental health, and the whole question of what that means for well-being in the workplace. Because you are not just your job. It's your well-being that's so critical as well. And from that, you can see that we've adopted that very quickly in the US, much like the UN sustainability goals. People are beginning to talk about that connection in great ways. But history tells us that your values, when you're shook up, when your values shift, it triggers something which allows us to think about a new story. So I want to try to shake you up a little bit to think about the new story you want to create for yourself about how you want to live. Translate?
Yeah, so دكتور ريتش بيتكلم على توجه جديد في التطوير المهني اللي هي مسألة انهم اكتشفوا انه الوحدة او وحدة الانسان واحدة من الاشياء اللي تسبب بعض المشاكل للاشخاص او مشاكل كثير للاشخاص. فبالتالي وجدوا انه تاثيراتها كثير في التطوير المهني، ووجدوا انه في شيء جدا مهم وراء هذا الشيء اللي هو الصحة العقلية، موضوع الصحة العقلية. كانوا افترضوا انه لازم يضعوا الصحة العقلية ايضا من ضمن الاشياء اللي يضعوها في التطوير المهني. وبعض الاشياء اللي ممكن تسوي لنا تغييرات في القيم او في المبادئ الاساسية والقيم اللي احنا ننظر فيها للحياة وننظر فيها للدنيا، ممكن تغير لنا نظرتنا ايضا للوظائف. فالان هو بيستعرض فيديو وان شاء الله يعني بنستفيد منه.
We are wondering what is happening to the world. We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth Industrial Revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
With the ability to visualize brain activity, for example, through a simple consumer-based EEG device, it gives us access to ourselves in ways that we've never before thought possible. It unlocks the black box that is the brain and enables us to really, truly be able to realize an identity that is aspirational.
There's now a scientific foundation for the effects of mindfulness on the brain, on the genome, on biological aging. And when the human mind does know itself, then you get the potential for a new renaissance that restructures itself in terms of our relationship to life, our relationship to the planet, our relationship to work.
We need a different economic model. By that I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism, with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need to shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a value shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
Hopefully that stimulated you to think about how do you want to live? And what are you seeing with those glasses on that tell you something is changing and we need a new story about how we want to live? So there's the need for the new story about job and a new story about how do we want to live? And how do this group of us come together to say, how do we connect learning, work, and well-being to make that happen? That's why this conference is so different than most and so important to have in this country here for the first time. Now, another story is how do you want to live is, I think, about what do you want for success? What do you call success, sir? What do you call success, man? How do you define it? And a colleague of mine, Richard Leider, calls it having a good life. And the short lecture on how to create a good life is to ask yourself, are you doing the right work? And that means, are you doing things that are tied to your aptitudes? They always show up. They consistently are there. They get you into flow. Are they connected to interest areas that motivate you and strike you as doing something meaningful and tied to who you are? And are they connected to the values that really drive who I am and my own integrity? That connection is, are you doing the right work? And not everyone gets to choose the right work, but we're saying let's take our career 1 month at a time, and how can we get more help or more mentoring or more schooling to get closer to the right work? Secondly, am I doing with people that we love? Ask yourself about, do you feel that you work with people who really care about you, who watch for your back, support you? And the third part, in the place you belong, as simply as having a window where you work, or going home and having an office where there's music or flowers, some color, all the literature that talks about, are you in the right place? And then lastly, this notion, which is the powerful one, are you doing it on purpose? And the best way to understand purpose, as quickly and short as we can make it, is when you wake up in the morning, can you actually say, I'm going to get up, I'm going to give, and I'm going to grow? Because when we give, that gives us purpose. When we grow, we have purpose.
Okay. دكتور ريتش بدأ الفيديو طبعا يتكلم عن الثورة الصناعية الرابعة وإنه كيف بدل في ثورات صناعية صارت قبل كانت تغير كيف نحن نشتغل مع الأشياء، بس دلوقتي الثورة الصناعية الرابعة صارت تغيرنا نحن أصلا، نحن علاقتنا بالعالم ونحن كيف الأشياء يعني كلها بتغيرنا بسبب إنه الثورة الصناعية الرابعة قاعدة تغير أشياء فينا أكثر من إنها تغير أشياء نحن كيف نشتغلها، فبالتالي نحن الآن عندنا فرصة نحن نغير أشياء كثيرة في حياتنا، نحن ممكن نصنع قصة جديدة بالنسبة لنا. فهنا دكتور ريتش يسأل إنه كيف تبي تعيش؟ إيش تعريف الجود لايف بالنسبة لك؟ إيش تعريف الحياة الكريمة بالنسبة لك؟ فهو اقتبس من ريتشارد ليدر يقول لك إنك أنت تعمل الشيء الصح، فسؤالك في السؤال الأول تسأل نفسك إيش هو الشيء المناسب أو الصح بالنسبة لي اللي يناسبني أنا، اللي أنا أكون منسجم معاه وأكون متوافق معاه ومتوائم معه. هذه النقطة الأولى. النقطة الثانية مع الناس اللي أنا بحبهم، مين هل الناس اللي قاعد أشتغل معاهم هم الناس اللي أنا أحبهم ولا لا؟ في المكان اللي أنا أشعر بالانتماء إليه. 3 نقاط، شيء أنا مناسب لي مع الناس اللي أحبهم في المكان اللي أنا أنتمي إليه، ويكون عن قصد، يكون عن قصد مش إنه والله بالصدفة أو بالبركة أو ما إلى ذلك. وسأل سؤال مهم إنك لما تصحى في النهار تسأل نفسك هل أنا اليوم راح أقدم شيء وراح أنمو ولا لا؟
That is a very smart man who can make that complex very simple.
Maybe I didn't.
So, how do we value the lives of people? If we're talking about the good life and talking about well-being, what do we know about what's important to people? How do you value other people's lives?
طبعا الفيديو هذا مقدمته انه كيف نحن نقدر حياة الآخرين، حياة الناس.
Now the data in your report comes from one place, the Gallup World Poll. Now you might ask yourself, Gallup, why do you do this? Why do you go out to so many places and ask people, how's your life going? We do it for one reason, and I'll tell you a story. In the 1950s, famous broadcast journalist Edward R. Murrow was doing an interview with our founder, Dr. George Gallup. But in this hour-long interview, he had a moment where he looked at Dr. Gallup and he said, Dr. Gallup, of all the things that you've studied, what is it that interests you the most? The answer he gave back and what interests you most was happiness.
Happiness is important. And if something is really important, it needs to be measured if it's going to be taken really seriously by people. So the lesson for leaders is to look around and see which countries, in fact, people do regard themselves as very happy, and then ask why and apply it in our country. That's the broad lesson. What the Gallup World Poll does is provide on a uniform, comparable basis right across the world a measure of how people value their own lives, and that's the single most important statistic in the world. And so to have that comparably collected, it's as important as it was over 50 years to develop annual accounts of income and expenditure.
The reason that Gallup does the Gallup World Poll is because we want to understand what makes a great life. Because if we can understand what makes a great life, we can then better inform leaders as to the activities that they need to do in order to improve people's lives.
الفيديو بيتكلم عن تصويت او دراسه تعملها شركه جالوب، وكان منبعها انترفيو او مقابله مع دكتور جالوب، سالوه ايش الشيء اللي انت مهتم فيه اكثر شيء؟ فجاوبهم اللي هو السعاده. فقالوا نحن كيف ممكن نقيس السعاده؟ فعملوا زي الدراسات او الاستفتاءات في عده دول، وطلعت نتائج الدول اكثر سعاده والدول اقل سعاده. وايضا سووا هذا الاستبيان لانهم يهتموا بحياه الاخرين وكيف الناس تقدر حياتها، وبالتالي عملوا هذه الدراسات.
So again, we've asked you to look at yourself and say, what creates you to have a sense of well-being? And happiness is a popular word, but how do you care about the lives of other people and your own life is a story about how we treat each other and what do we do to have a better sense of community and find a way to support each other.
دكتور ريتش يتكلم عن انه ايضا لما نهتم بحياة الناس ونهتم بحياتنا، نهتم بحياتنا ايضا بحياة الناس. فنحن كيف ممكن نهتم بالاثنين مع بعض؟ هي عن طريق ان احنا كيف نتعامل معاهم وكيف نتفاعل معاهم. هذا الشيء بيساعدنا ان احنا نكتب قصة كيف تكون يعني قصتنا جميلة ورائعة عن طريق التعامل مع الآخرين.
And now Gallup, which collects data from all over the world, allows you to go on and give feedback every month to get an idea how happy we are based upon country.
دكتور ريتش يقول لكم جرب تسوي دائما استفتاءات بشكل شهري عن سعادة الناس في مختلف أنحاء العالم، وهو يدعوكم انكم انتم تشاركوا في هذه الاستفتاءات عشان برضه يكون في تصور واضح عن السعادة في مختلف دول العالم.
Which gives you as managers and leaders to have a sense, what does it take for a person to feel valued and feel good about their life?
بالنسبة للمدراء والرؤساء بيعطيكم أيضا تصور كيف ممكن انكم تخلوا موظفينكم أو الناس يشتغلوا معاكم يشعروا بالسعادة والرضا عن حياتهم.
And now we take a look at, well, what about organizations? What's the new story for organizations and how they have to be in this new world where we're trying to connect learning, work, and well-being?
والآن حنسمع ونشوف قصة للمنظمات أو قصة جديدة للمنظمات.
Imagine an organization where everyone is united behind a bold purpose, where everyone is customer obsessed, where leaders are inspiring and authentic, where people are empowered and supported, where potential explodes with possibility. This must be the aspiration for your organization, a radically human organization. But If your people can't move past how things used to be to how things need to be, you won't get there. They need the right mindset. You have to disrupt traditional thinking at every level of your organization. Because all the strategy, planning, and innovation that you pour into your ambitions is wasted if you can't bring your people along on the journey. Connect each individual into your vision. Give them the right structures, the right systems and processes, and then get out of their way. Let your people reach their potential, and collectively we will all rise. Imagine.
Now that motivates me tremendously because it talks about our potential. And it's easy to say that can be done quickly, but we need language. And that language is very helpful for us to see the connection between learning, work, and well-being, and how people want to be treated.
الفيديو كان بيتكلم عن انه تخيل انه انت تشتغل في منظمة قوية ومعك ناس وقيادة رائعة وكل شيء واضح وتشتغل لغرض نبيل ورائع وانت يعني متفق عليه. فكان انسبايرنج او خلينا نقول كان ملهم بالنسبه لدكتور ريتش انه نحن فعلا في منظمات كيف ممكن نوصل لهذا التغيير، ونحن كيف ممكن نحن نستخدم التعلم والعمل وايضا الصحه الشخصيه والنفسيه انه نحن يصير عندنا تغير او يكون عندنا الانسان يكون في الوسط.
So if we think about taking career development to the workplace, and what does it say to managers or organization? This book is only out about 2 weeks now, and it talks about the notion of about hierarchy and how that isn't as helpful as having teams and using teams. It's not about your job, it's what work do you do while you're there, because job titles mean less and less because you're all asked to be a problem solver. We don't want a boss who demands and commands us. We want a boss who acts like a coach for us, helps us grow and learn and be heard and feel valuable. And we all know that rules put us down and standardize and wipe out individual potential. We want a culture that allows us to thrive and to be powered, to have a sense that we make a difference and that we're valued. And yes, we have to make profits. There's no question about that. But the relationship between having purpose in what you do and profits is quite nice. That if I have a purpose for why I'm here, profits follow quite nicely. And then it's not so much about how many widgets you produced, it's what experience are we engaging the worker in? What is their experience? What can they tell us about that experience that causes them to feel whole, to feel valued, and also to add value?
This is lovely. طبعا في كتاب جديد نزل قبل اسبوع دكتور ريتش يتكلم عنه انه كيف نحن ممكن نصنع قصه انه الانسان يكون هو منتصفها، وهذا يتطلب انه في المنظمات يكون في تغيير من انه والله يكون نحن نعتمد على فرق اكثر من انه يكون هيكله، انه يكون عندنا اعمال ومهام مش مسميات وظيفيه، المسميات الوظيفيه بتتغير دائما باستمرار، يكون عندنا كوتش شخص يدربنا اكثر من يكون عندنا رئيس. نشتغل على الثقافه اكثر من القواعد والانظمه، القواعد والانظمه ممكن توضع في الادراج ما حدش بيبص عليها يعني، بس الثقافه هي اللي تبقى. النمو وليس انه الترويج، إنه كيف ننمو مو احنا كيف نروج لانفسنا بس. الغرض وليس فقط الربح، والربح دكتور ريتش يقول انه ايضا مهم، لكن مهم ان احنا نكون نشتغل لغرض معين او غايه معينه. ويكون ايضا يهمنا تجربه الموظفين اكثر من انه والله ايش المخرجات نحن نطلع فيها وايش النتائج، لا تجربه الموظف انه كيف يستفيد وكيف يتعلم.
We talked before about how do you value people's lives? Well, how do you value them at work? And do you provide these kind of conditions not only for their own well-being, but their ability to add value more for what you have to have done in your own competitive advantage? So what are some easy things you might think about taking with you to use tomorrow as we kind of close this out? This is an interesting story. If you think about how we looked at life, there were 3 boxes of life. You went to school, you went to work, and then you retired. And a gentleman named Richard Bowles, who wrote the most popular book, What Color is Your Parachute, many of you may know, I was lucky to be, he was my mentor. And if you look at that book, my flower is my story in there since 1986. And what he helped me understand is the power of really life planning as opposed to just boxes of life. How do you plan and design your life? Because what happened is he got to understand that we were looking at careers like this. If you kind of close this out, this is the story of Richard Bowles. And what he helped me understand is the power of really life planning as opposed to just boxes of life. Because what happened is he got to understand that we were looking at careers like this. If you kind of close this out, this is the story of Richard Bowles. And what he helped me understand is the power of really life planning as opposed to just boxes of life. Because what happened is he got to understand that we were looking at careers like this. could help me, please. Would you mind? We looked at careers as if they were straight lines, and you punched tickets to get somewhere, and you did this, and it was a very linear process. But most of us know you can drop it now. Thank you. You can drop it. That's not the case. We all have bumps in the road. We all have challenges. We all get discouraged. And what he says, it's much better not to think about in that linear fashion, but think it in a different way. That we now have to look at, regardless of where we are, long life learning. We have to all live a long life and be learning all the time. Notice the difference, not lifelong, but long life learning. That's a nice little catch. Secondly, work might best be understood by the purposeful commitments we make. My brother is disabled, and he is a dependent of my wife and I. And we do a lot of work to care for my brother. That's not paid, it's because the purposeful commitment that defines who we are to include him in our life. So work doesn't always come with pay, it comes with the reward system. And thirdly, since we're all going to live longer, how do we understand the whole notion of play and its importance and well-being regardless of our age? Because what we've learned, life is not a straight tape measure.
دكتور ريتش نتكلم عن النظرة التقليدية للحياة الوظيفية والحياة المهنية، إنه نحن ندخل نتعلم، بعد ما نتعلم بنروح نشتغل، وبعد ما نشتغل نحن بنتقاعد، إنه كأنها خط مستقيم، لكن هي في الأساس هي مش خط مستقيم واحد، هي فيها تعرجات، فيها اختلافات، فيها طلعات ونزلات، فيها صعوبات وتحديات. والغرض إنه نحن المفروض نغير نظرتنا من إنه تعلم شغل تقاعد إلى نحن كيف نعيش حياة كلها تعلم، كلها تطور، كلها عطاء، كلها بذل، كلها غاية.
This is Richard Bowles here, and his book has been written and now sold about 18 million copies. And I was lucky to do that in 1982, and 90% of that flower exercise has come true for me. So I believe very strongly in designing a life, not living by default. So when I ask you to put your glasses on, are you living by design or by default? That's what career development is about.
الكتاب طبعا هذا اسمه ايش لون الباراشوت تبعك، والدكتور ريتش يعني داخل فيه بعمق واعتمد عليه كثير وايضا غير حياته. فيقول لك انه نحن كيف نعيش حياتنا، من نحن نصمم حياتنا، مش انه والله نعيش الحياه التقليديه العاديه الاعتياديه اللي هي تديرنا مش نحن نديرها.
He also said this very profound statement. He says we need to pay more attention to what you're looking for in life, not by default, but design what you're looking for in life. And hunger for wisdom, and put everything in a larger context. That's why you're not just a job. Career development is not about just a job. You are much more than that. Learning, work, and well-being is all connected. That's the joy of this conference, to bring that new language, I think, to all of us. One key thing is critical for all of us to acknowledge. Not everyone gets to move forward as fast as others. And one major factor is something called social capital. And I'd like you to think about in your head who your 5 best friends are. And your 5 best friends are the ones who tell you what school to go to, where to study, where to worship, where to shop, where to go to film, what restaurant to go to. And who you hang around with has a lot to do with what you become. That's called social capital. This young man that's here today, how cool it is that he's here to get access to this social capital. Mustafa, learning the number of people that he's meeting at this conference, the social capital he's creating. Social capital, and maybe as important here, as you notice, as important as your college degree. That's a powerful statement. And helping people gain social capital is a way we help reduce some of the injustices we see when people don't feel included.
في مفهوم جدا مهم انكم تعرفوه له موضوع رأس المال الاجتماعي. مين هم اعز 5 اصحاب عندك او اصدقاء عندك؟ هذول 5 اصحاب هم اللي اثروا على قراراتك المهنيه. اي جامعه بتدخل، أي وظيفة بتاخذها أو مع ذلك، وتأثيرهم بيكون عليك بشكل كبير سواء عرفت أو ما عرفت. وضرب أمثلة إنه هذا الشخص اللي هنا موجود، الكول اللي موجود معنا جالس هنا، هو جالس لأنه أكيد إنه في أشخاص حوله أثروا فيه، وهذا مفهوم جدا مهم نضعه في الاعتبار، إنه الناس اللي حولي هم بيأثروا فيه بشكل كبير.
So who do you meet while you're here at this conference? Who do you network with? Do you find a mentor? Because that's what gives you social capital.
وضروري انكم هنا في المؤتمر برضو تشوفوا مين اشخاص تجلسوا معاهم تتعرفوا عليهم، ومين اللي ممكن يكونوا مرشدين لكم.
And now I'd like you to really look at your sunglasses. And I'd like you to think of these concepts, that in fact, whether you're 7, 17, or 71, I believe there's something that's useful called 3 Eyes UA. That every one of us in this room is working to not become irrelevant. In a workplace that's changing, none of us want to feel irrelevant, whether you're 7, 17, or 71. And as a 72-year-old person, who people tell me to go off and play golf and retire, that doesn't help me feel relevant. Young people and you and I are all trying to find relevancy. Secondly, we're all trying to find a way to not be invisible. Think of people who feel invisible in society and what it's like for them to be invisible and what that does to their well-being. Or the whole notion of what happens when you feel isolated and kept separate. Think of the young people we isolate, or people of color, or women, how we isolate them in certain categories. So the question becomes, those are the 3 I's. Secondly, it is wise if we can learn, I don't need you to like me. Getting someone to like you is having candy. It goes away rather quickly. I would much rather have you understand me and take time to understand me. And the mature person with wisdom is less interested in external approval and much more in being understood. Is that fair? Does that make sense? And then the issue about anticipation. Once you take away someone's ability to look forward, to believe they have possibilities, they have lost hope. And when you take hope from people, they really find soon after they have nothing to anticipate. Whether in a nursing home and maybe your elderly parents, when they don't feel like they can anticipate something, which may be to see their grandchild married, or a baby born, or to say another Sunday you're going to visit with them. When you take away anybody's ability to anticipate something, that's when they die and their soul is of very little value to them.
قاعدة جدا مهمة دكتور ريتش فيلر قاعد يستعرضها اللي هي 3 I's UA. يقول سواء عمرك 7 أو 17 أو 71 هذه كلها تنطبق عليك بغض النظر عن عمرك، أنت تنطبق عليك. أنت تتجنب، الناس كلهم يتجنبوا أنهم يكونوا دون مغزى أو معنى أو غاية معينة، أنه ما يكون لهم قيمة. وبرضه كلهم يتجنبوا أنهم ما يكونوا غير مرئيين. ما حدش عايز يكون غير مرئي، الناس عايزة تكون مرئية والناس تشوفها. وبرضه الناس مش عايزة أنها تكون isolated، يعني أنها ما تكونش منعزلة أو منفصلة عن الناس، عايز أنه تكون داخلين مع الناس. والشيء اللي يبحث عنها كل شخص في هذا سواء مهما كان عمره انه يتم فهمه، يكون الناس تفهمه، مش الناس تحبه، الناس تفهمه، ومش انه والله يكون عنده تحفيز خارجي، لا هو عايز الناس تفهمه مش انها تحبه. الشيء الاخر الناس يبحثوا عن قدرتهم على توقع ماذا يمكن ان يحدث. مهما كانت وظيفتك، مهما كانت عمرك، تحاول انت عايز انك انت تعرف ايش ممكن يكون في الفترة القادمة وايضا تخطط لها.
It seems to me whether we're working with our son or daughter, or our partner at home, or a client we're working with, or a teacher we're teaching, or an employee we manage, those are truths. And if we can go into every session to help someone with that in mind, I think we have a great start in showing empathy to who they are.
لما نستخدم هذه الأشياء كلها، أي أحد سواء تعرفه قريب منك أو بعيد عنك أو حتى ممكن يكون أحد يستفيد من خدماتك، أنت بتعالج واحدة من هذه الأشياء اللي دكتور ريتش استعرضها وتكلمنا عنها.
So I would end by saying a few last comments that all of us have to give a pitch or tell a story to recruit students to our college or to buy my product or come to me for coaching or whatever. And I think I found these 7 words are universally helpful. It's really, I want to help you navigate a lifetime because it is a slinky, it's not a tape measure, of the many roles we play because they are all going to face transitions. So to me, career really is about navigating a lifetime of transitions. It's that slinky, it's not a tape measure. That seems to be useful language to me.
دكتور ريتش يقول انه في عرض او كلمات هو يستخدمها دائما لاستقطاب اي احد او حتى اقناع اي احد اي شيء معين. يقول خذ لك ال7 كلمات هذه، طبعا هي باللغه الانجليزيه، انه نافيجيت، يعني نافيجيت بالمصري يعني ابحر او ابحث، والله مش عارف، حد مصري يقولها يعني. استكشف. I'm looking for Egyptian words. I don't know how to say it. That's why. I'm from Saudi. Sorry يعني لما تستخدموا جوجل مابس دي نافيجيت. يعني أنا لما اخذ الحنطوره اقول له وصلني هناك، هو نافيجيت مي ثرو الاسوان سيتي ويوديني ان شاء الله اللي انا عايزه. فيقول لك انت برضه نافيجيت طول عمرك انه ايش الدور اللي بتاخذه في موضوع الترانزيشنز اللي هي التنقلات والتبدلات والتحولات اللي ممكن تصير في حياتك. فانت حتحتاج انك انت تسوي نافيجيشن، مش عارف اقولها بالعربي سامحوني، مرور، كيف تمر بمرور المسارات التحولات هذه.
Yes, thank you very much. Wonderful. Yeah. And I'll leave you with this, that each one of us, whether you're a college president or working with young people, the young boy over there, we are all struggling with trying to reduce the cost, quality, access triangle. We know we have to reduce cost of career development. We have to be able to reduce the cost of it so that we can make it available to more people. We know we have to improve quality, make it deeper and better, and we have to find a way that everybody gets access to it, not just certain people with privilege. We can do that through, I would argue, these ways, and this is what I'll talk about in some of my future experiences. Gamification, embeddedness, many ways to make that. We can provide almost what we call career insurance. What can we do to give people a sense of insurance so that they can find a way to navigate? As I ask you to leave and reflect, I would ask you these questions. Are you learning as fast as the world is changing? You can't possibly say yes. But what can you do with your experiences and reflect on it so you can access information that's not here but in some other way to learn so you get more of what you need? Secondly, is the change you see in work and well-being asking for a new story? I think it's asking you for a new story, and what do you take from this conference but a new story? And thirdly and last, to the employers here, if there are some, do we put more into the life of our workers than we take out? That's the question, and we try to get people to be more active in their own life to navigate a lifetime of transitions. Those are my intentions as we try to share some ideas with you, and thank you so much for my interpreter friend. I'd ask you to think about how to wear these glasses, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure.